We're going to talk about solving by factoring. So the very first step you're going to take when you're solving by factoring is to make sure your equation is set equal to 0. That's what our graphic organizer says to do. You'll notice our equation says x squared minus 9x plus 11 equals negative 3. So since this side on the right-hand side is not a 0, I'm going to have to move it to the other side to make it so it is the 0. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides since it's a negative 3. Negative 3 plus 3 gives you 0. 11 plus 3 gives you 14. And then the rest of it, when you're adding this down, won't have anything to combine with it. So we're left over with x squared minus 9x plus 14. Now the rest of it says you're going to factor using GCF if it's a binomial. Right now we have a 1, 2, 3 term, so it's a trinomial. You're going to use a product sum cross. So on the top, it's your A times C. On your bottom is just B. Now, A is just the coefficient in front of the x squared. So in this case, your A equals 1. If you see another number in there, then you'll put that number. Your B is the coefficient in front of your x, which in this case is a negative 9, and your C is a 14. So A times C gives you 14, and B is your negative 9. This is where you have to come up with two numbers that multiply to positive 14 and add to negative 9. So you can start listing out some numbers that multiply to 14. These are the only ones I can think of. Now, if I add 1 and 14, that will give me 15. If I add 2 and 7, that will give me a positive 9. So how do I make it so that it makes it into a negative 9? Well, I will just simply make both of these negative, because a negative 2 times a negative 7 gives you positive 14, but when you add them, that gives you negative 9. So the idea behind these two numbers that you just got, the negative 2 and the negative 7, that'll actually help you split up this middle term. You're actually taking this negative 9x and breaking it up into negative 2x and negative 7x. So I have a 1x squared coming up from the beginning here, and then splitting up that negative 9x into negative 2x and then negative 7x, and then putting in the 14 from my original part of the equation. So I'm just rewriting this equation, but splitting up that middle term to be negative 2x and negative 7x. The rest of it is what we call factor by grouping. So you're going to take the first two and you're going to factor out the GCF, aka the greatest common factor, and then you'll do the same with the second two. So you have to look at the numbers and also look at the x's. Between 1 and negative 2, the only thing that you can factor out of both of them is 1. Between x squared and x, the only thing you can factor out of both of them is 1x, since this one only has 1 and this one has 2. So you'll write that out. That's your GCF, your greatest common factor. To figure out what goes inside of the parentheses, I really just think about if I divide this by 1x, if I divide this by 1x, what's left over in here? The ones will cancel. X squared divided by x gives you an x left over. If you have a negative 2x divided by 1x, the x's will cancel out, and this will just leave your negative 2 left over. The next half, same thing, we're going to factor out a GCF, so greatest common factor. What does negative 7x and 14 have in common? So I'm going to look at the negative 7 and the 14. If the number in front is negative, you're going to factor out a negative number. So between 7 and 14, they have 7 in common. So I want you to think about what will happen or what will be left over if you have a 7 in common. This one doesn't have an x, but this one does. So they don't have a greatest common factor of x. So I'm going to go ahead and divide out negative 7 since that is my greatest common factor. And I will write out what's left over on the inside. So on the inside, when I do negative 7x divided by negative 7, that just leaves x left over. 14 divided by negative 7 leaves me a negative 2 left over. Once I get to this point, I know I've factored it correctly if these things inside the parentheses are the same. That ends up being your greatest common factor. So essentially you're factoring out an x minus 2 because they both have it. And what's left over is going to be this 1x and then minus 7. So this part was just factoring. The rest of it is going to be the solving by factoring. You're supposed to get an x value. So because you have two things multiplied together equals 0, you'll set each of these factors equal to 0 and solve them separately. So on the left-hand side, I'll add 2 to both sides. I'll get x equals 2. On the right-hand side, I will add 7 to both sides, and I'll get x equals 7. So your answer to this problem is x equals 2 and x equals 7.